Good morning, everyone. Sorry for being just a couple of moments late there. Life happens outside the streams as well. Anyways, with the excuses out of the way, welcome to the Sonic Ringbone Sonic the Hedgehog AU writing stream. I'm your host and AU creator and lead author, Joshua Tarwater. And for those who don't know, I'll just cover it now while we got the synopsis up. This is an AU that will eventually, once I get past the current chapters, be focused on my take on Amy Rose, which is rooted in a lot of a heavy study of her character and a lot of the ideas and execution around her creation. I got a whole essay on Twitter if you ever want to read it. I recommend the Google Doc, to be honest, more so, because 250 tweets has given me a lot of ridicule and has, suffice to say, it's also a difficult read from what I understand. If you ever want to see that link, well, just let me know and I'll go ahead and drop it in the chat. But, as the synopsis says, today it's all about Sonic vs. Eggman. And so, that's where we'll be going today. And if you're not familiar with the way I do my streams, just a quick rundown on that. I open my streams with the first part being focused and dedicated to writing. And while I don't play music on stream, I do have a playlist on Spotify of what I'm listening to in the background. And you'll usually see it mentioned over at the notes at the beginning. And you can find that link on there. But usually it's going to be the last song at the playlist, what I'm listening to. But once I finish the writing half, I usually take about a 15 to 30 minute break to stretch, get some water, and loosen up for the second half, where I proof and talk about my intentions and ideas behind the scene. You can ask me questions all throughout the stream, and I'll be happy to answer them. I'll go on long tangents as it is. And why a lot of my opinions are rooted in facts about the franchise, they are, at the end of the day, still opinions, and could totally miss the mark of the intentions of the creators. Regardless, here we are, and I've been in the middle of writing an AU story, and I hope it entertains, regardless of my level of accuracy. For now, though, time to get into today's story. You'll also notice that I use Microsoft Word for my writing, and it does not like Eggman's name, and I simply haven't added him to the dictionary yet. And mind me just a second. I need a different song to listen to now. Wasn't quite expecting to need one at this point in the scene, but here we are. Alright, there we go. I picked out a new song to listen to. Sorry, this has killed the pace on the writing, but it's time for a bit of an important scene at the AU now. just gotta... And there we go. Went a little longer than I expected, and really pushing the character limits. Whole scene in a whole actually didn't go quite as I expected, but absolutely nothing wrong with that. I'll go ahead and start covering those details shortly, though. But before that, it's going to be time for me to go ahead and take my break. And so I shall leave everybody on the break screen. And good morning, Mecha from the 80s. You got here just in time for me to go take my break. Hopefully it won't be too long of one, though. Usually they're about 15 to 30 minutes. But a lot to talk about with this scene, as I bring an end to the episode of New History. And probably a whole scene earlier than I expected. But I don't mind. Gonna be a very busy week for me, though, to get ready for the next stream. But for now, we'll stay focused on this stream after a short break. Thanks for joining me, everyone. I'll see you in a bit. And I'm back, everyone. Just as I got back, though, I left you all in total silence. No music at all. I'm really sorry about that. Now that I am back, though, a quick introduction to those just joining for the first time. I'm Joshua Tarwater, the host and creator of the Sonic Ring Bond AU. And this stream, I'm totally frazzled right now. I'm babbling away. So let's try that again. I'm your host, the creator of the AU, and the author, Joshua Tarwater. I may have a guest in Mecha from the 80s over in the chat. They joined right before break, so they may not be here at the moment. To everyone else, though, welcome. This is now the second part of today's writing stream, as is typically the case with my writing streams. During the second half of the stream, I will go over what I wrote in the first half, proof it, and take the time to talk about a lot of what I was thinking about while I was working. For those who aren't familiar with the AU, it was created in response to me creating a redesign of Amy Rose, who you saw there in the little break image. And that is based on what if she had Sonic's moveset rather than the Pico Pico Hammer. The AU itself, though, is heavily rooted in the idea of making the rings a significantly more important part of Sonic's world rather than just a gameplay mechanic. With all that covered, I'll go ahead and jump right in. If anyone has any questions while I'm working, feel free to drop them in the chat or just say hi. I'm always happy to reply to everybody. And if you check the chat, you'll see I got a link to the playlist that I'm listening to. Normally I would say it's the last song on there, but this scene ends up with two. And this is the last of the episode of New History scenes, which is a bit interesting because that was not the original plan tonight. We'll get to that when we get to that part of the scene, though. So let's go ahead and jump right in. So, first off, again, typical point of my opening paragraphs is just to set the mood and idea for what's going to be happening at the scene today. This one's a little bit off because things go in different directions. But give me just a second to proof the scene here. And I'll go over what I see as I go about it. And of course, there is a lot to talk about, such as opening up Sonic vs. Eggman and the proposition that perhaps Sonic is best known for fighting Eggman and the heroics that come with it. And it's not just Amy that I aim to explore with my AU, but also to look at characters like Sonic himself in ways that most people don't. And it's not a matter if I'm right or wrong, though my analysis and handling of the characters is based heavily off of how I perceived the series and what I found out was accurate to what the creator's intentions were. And so this influences a lot of stuff in how I write, but it's still, of course, also shaped by my preferences and biases, and so my take on Sonic is probably a lot different from what a lot of people know of. And so, as we go into this paragraph, I have been doing throughout this opening episode with Sonic is I've been establishing that this is Sonic. If you've played a game with him in it, he's experienced that story. I can't necessarily say that he encompasses all Sonics, because quite a number of Sonics are very different. Fleetway, Archie, SatAM, Adventures, Underground, French comics, books. the movie, there's a lot of different takes on Sonic, but mine is mostly going to be rooted in the games for his history and the Japanese version of the OVA for his personality, as these are things that I feel best reflect the creator's vision around him. And over the course of this scene, you'll see me really take Sonic from the idea of him being a obsessive character, as I was talking about on the prior stream, as Sonic is presented very, very, very obsessively in the last 10 years, with the idea of him being a hero who stops Eggman to the point of it pretty much being his job. And I really take the time to run with this obsessiveness and really want to break that out of his character so I can take him back to a more aloof adventure where you're never really sure what he's thinking. And you'll see that a lot as I write this particular episode and this chapter of it, as I go from the idea early on of sharing Sonic's thoughts to his thoughts being hidden or more abstract and more presented in his motions. Now, of course, I also have a character limit that I can work with because I publish to Tapas, and I only get 15,000 characters, so you can see right here, I only got so much I can work with, and being at 13,000 characters puts me pretty close to that limit. It's going to be interesting when I go into format, because that number is really going to get changed up a bit. Plus, certain things don't get counted there, and other things will. But I'll worry about that when I personally get to it. What we'll be looking at right now is that one of the things that I focus on with Sonic that a lot of people like to ignore. They like to look at him as the selfless hero who goes out and saves the day because it's the right thing to do. And they base that on the fact that he's kind and takes heroic actions, sacrificing of himself for the benefit of others. And while this is true, and it can be traced as stemming from his kindness and his sense of justice and his hatred of oppression, it completely ignores the fact that he's also a selfish character whose greatest joy is to run and challenge himself. That really has little to do with saving people. Now, it could align with saving people, as he can't enjoy his running if things that bother him are bothering him. And so the fact that his heroics and kindness would align with his selfishness is very interesting. But it also makes him a bit more complex and difficult to write. However, he also has a stubbornness that goes with his selfishness, and while a lot of people see it as his will to never give up, to never give in, to fight to the last breath no matter what, it does lead into what I was talking about with the idea of this obsession that Sonic was given. And it's a very unnatural obsession, but it's one that most fans don't even recognize is there, because they themselves, for the most part, perpetuated the idea of this obsession just through basic fan talk dialogue and the general fact that it becomes an argument as to why Sonic doesn't have a large rogues gallery. In fact, it's very tiny and almost non-existent. That said, it's a pretty interesting way to look at him and to see how this obsessiveness that's been fed into him over the years has affected his character. And so I'm playing that very negatively right here off of Sonic. It's not just that it's a trait that I dislike, but one of the things that concerns me about Sonic as a character is as you go into Sonic Colors through Lost World and other such games, and especially over on the Sonic Boom side, it is very easy for Sonic as a character to start to be perceived as a bully. Eggman is a bumbling oaf who can't accomplish anything, and Sonic still comes along and messes up his plans. And this is not a particularly good look for Sonic. he's supposed to be a hero, a selfless individual, a role model that one chases after, and when he's a corny stand-up comedian bullying on a rather clumsy old man, it doesn't look good. And so I rather gladly take the time to particularly shine that in a good light. I will gladly embrace it negatively and really highlight how it can hurt Sonic as a character, no less as a person. And it's why with this final line, this opening paragraph, I ask if he can be saved when he himself is typically the hero. And of course, Eggman just doesn't care. And with the idea of Eggman not caring, I wrap up this opening paragraph to lead into the scene itself. And now, I was especially talking about this last stream. My typical style of introducing a scene and a setting is just quick, sharp sentences, which are designed to let the reader's imagination fill it all in together. You go klaxons blaring, you're like, okay, alarms. Missiles firing, you're like, yeah, missiles firing. Conveyor belts working and overgrown. You're like, what? You start thinking about conveyor belts, and you start thinking, what does overgrown mean? And you're like, well, they're all over the place, but that could also be vegetative life. And then they got electrified floors and gravity warping chambers. You know, your head starts to spin. Plant life ablaze, which I actually have that messed up. Because ablaze in this case means it's on fire. Natural lakes and mechanical world. That should definitely be a trippy little thing. Machines versus Livingstone. And determined bleach streak racing through. The idea to a lot of this structuring, again, as I said, is to paint quick pictures that just naturally come together and create a wild image into the mind, which sticks with you as you read through the rest of the scene. And in this particular case, I was actually talking about it a lot in the prior stream, which you can listen to on my YouTube channel. Just look for, should be Y Nimbus? Literally Y, followed by the word Nimbus, except it's spelled with a Y instead of an I. But if you follow me on Twitter, at Josh Starwater, or better yet, look for at Sonic Ringbond. Make sure you put underscores between the words, and you will get all your updates there, as well as the links to the YouTube channel. All that said, I was actually talking about it a lot in the last stream that I really wasn't describing the Death Egg. I was describing it being overtaken by the overgrowth, but the actual exploration of the level as based off the Sonic & Knuckles version really wasn't making it into the story. And I talked about I really need to take the time to squeeze it into this scene in particular, so that way everyone will get a chance to feel like they're in the Death Egg that they know, rather than the strange, abstract, overgrown one. But even with those quick descriptions, it still requires a bit of additional, more detailed emphasis in storytelling, and that's where we get into this next paragraph. And allow me a moment as I give a quick read through it myself. And so as I read through that real quick and take care of the little grammatical errors, there will be a lot more. Don't worry about that. There will be plenty more. Is a little bit of history here. A quick reference to Sonic 3 and Knuckles. It is the end of one of Sonic's greatest adventures. Why CD is my personal favorite Sonic game. You will never hear me argue against how well crafted 3 and Knuckles is. It's a really brilliantly put together piece of work. It's a little lengthy, and a lot of things people like in it technically. I think don't really stand out the way people say it does. But those are personal opinions beyond the recognition of what it manages to achieve and does. It is a spectacular game, and if you can wrap your hands around the control to the old 2D games, it is definitely worth playing. Though I've spent far more time playing Sonic 3D, I have definitely spent many, many hours in that game. Both of those games definitely made up my childhood. And since we're talking the early 90s in that case, that's some time back. But as I move on from that, I start to also detail the transition, the transformation, that what you may know from the games is no longer true. And then, of course, I get back into Sonic's stubbornness, taking a bit more time to describe him racing around and all over this location, which is more so a necessity less for the storytelling, useful as it is to support the fact that my narrative is structured around the idea of what if this was a browser game with field maps and 2D action stages? And thus you'll see my notes here on a regular basis, including the introduction of the boss battle that we join at the end of this paragraph. Where I also, of course, take the time to highlight Eggman's own stubbornness, determination, and refusal to ever give up. It creates a less so a contrast, but a point of comparison between Sonic and Eggman. And while this stubbornness or willpower is normally a good thing for Sonic, I am purposely painting it in a bad light as I continue to highlight the obsession with Eggman. And so, of course, as we get to Sonic's first line for this particular chapter, almost the first word out of his mouth is Eggman. And as we go through the entire sentence, again, you see Sonic has gotten into this habit of it's always Eggman's fault, always Eggman's fault, always Eggman's fault. And it's a little surprised that thought process is going to be held by the reader if they're a fan of the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise, because for the most part, unless you are really deep into the Archie comics, potentially the Fleetway comics, I'm significantly less familiar with them, just about everything that is wrong always does tie back to Eggman. There are a few exceptions, such as Pac-Man and the Echidna tribe, as to why Chaos has its issues. The titular Black Knight and Merlina's scheme in Sonic and the Black Knight. Erazur Djinn in Sonic and the Secret Rings. But outside of these rather few exceptions, bar the Black Arms in Shadow's game, it is almost routinely Eggman's fault. And so Sonic addressing him as the big bad, he's the problem. Even the golems that are fighting Eggman see him as the big bad. Just constantly, it's bad, it's bad, it's bad, it's Eggman, 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 Eggman. And so I acknowledge this obsession with Sonic versus his main antagonist, but I also take this time now to break what's going on here. Now, narratively, as we get towards the end of this chapter, as the stream will near its end a bit later, one could call the ending a bit rushed, because I reach the climax, and then I don't give it enough room to really breathe into what follows. And I did contemplate it, but one of the problems I've had with past writings and with we'll call them prior versions of the AU is that interaction is one of the most important things to exploring characters, and the ideas for what would have been a following scene to this one, which would have still been episode of New History, and I just decided to cut it because it wouldn't have made sense narratively, is the idea that you need to have... Well, the idea would have been that there wouldn't have been anyone for Sonic to interact with. And I already started this episode with Sonic not interacting with anyone. In fact, there's absolutely no dialogue in the opening chapter. And that's fine on its own, except for the small problem that without that interaction, there's no exploration of Sonic's character. And what exploration I need to do to continue with his character requires both a far greater amount of time than what a single chapter would provide, but it's also significantly too little for wrapping up the climax and end of this episode. And so that's why I choose to avoid it. But let's go ahead and build towards the idea of Sonic needing to get past his obsession. And so a quick description of the golems that are floating around. My Anchorman ghosts are described in a prior scene. I really should draw them myself. Maybe one day I'll just be able to hire an artist to literally design all the enemies who will show up throughout the AU. That would be pretty cool. It would also require a tremendous amount of money, which I obviously don't have. And so again, it's just a quick description of how the scene starts. He's calling out Eggman, talking about the golems, but the golems see Sonic as an enemy as well. And part of what makes that important is that it's now painting the fact that there are more forces in my AU than just Eggman. And they are a threat to Eggman, even as they're not. And how you'll see that they're not is we'll get into the idea of Eggman calling out Sonic's obsession here. And to me, it's an important thing for him to call out. Because again, a lot of the focus of this scene is Sonic's obsession with Eggman. Now, a bit of a longer paragraph for me, because it is a bit of a descriptive paragraph. And then you make some grammatical corrections in it as we go along. But this one, I just need to take the time to describe the mech that Eggman's using. It's not a very impressive mech, but it's kind of a mix between an oversized Egg Robo and Black Eggman from the OVA. And it's significantly more so Egg Robo than it is Black Eggman. But that is the idea as we go through this particular thing. And of course, a bit of fun with Eggman. He's a showman, a clown, but he also gets annoyed by Sonic, but he's also amused by Sonic in this case, so a bit of a mirthful annoyance from him. And a bit more description of the condition of the Death Egg and the idea that it's just this overgrown, and in such a short amount of time. You gotta remember, it's only been a week since this happened. And so just, a number of quick things. Setting the scene, the introduction of the mech, it laying out fire and Sonic having to move. And again, this is also narratively, it's giving an idea how this fight goes of what would be a more structured boss fight overall in a game adaptation of the narrative. And I'll just take care of the last of the Little writing problems there. And so as we scroll forward into the next part of the scene, one of the things that I like to talk about with Sonic, and I talked about it a lot last scene as well, is why does Sonic crack wise? Why is he an irreverent character? Why is he, or what's the word I'm looking for? Cheeky. And a lot of it is multi-purpose. He can cheer people up, distract them from their lack of confidence, get under the skin of someone he's up against in a fight, and make their actions predictable, making it easier for him to do what he does, to distract himself from anything that may be bothering him. And so there's a lot that goes on with the idea of Sonic being cheeky, and I don't really avoid, I don't go out of my way to make it nuanced here. I literally say what his intentions are here. And so, of course, the joke both with the name of the zone, Egg Garden Zone, the idea that this overgrowth is taking everything over. And you get this idea of just getting into Sonic's skin. But what ends up happening is Eggman acts surprising in this case, and that he runs away. And so that's a lot of what is going to happen throughout this routine, is Sonic is the one pursuing Eggman. It is not Eggman challenging Sonic. It is not Eggman at the midst of one of his schemes. He's on the run. He's already in another fight, and here comes Sonic interrupting it. And so I start introducing the idea of Eggman is confused. He doesn't get what's driving Sonic. And this confusion becomes a necessity as we move deeper into the scene. And Sonic, of course, expecting Eggman's lies, and the obsession I'm currently driving, I take the time to really delve into the idea that he's very accusatory right now. He refuses to accept that Eggman could actually be innocent, that not everything that happens is Eggman's fault. And if the Shadow the Hedgehog game was any indication of it, no less the storybook games, that is true. But again, if you counted the last decade of Sonic material, even Lyric was technically Eggman's fault, just because he chased Sonic and gang into the prison that Lyric was in. And so, it's a bit of a mess, so to say, that the idea again that it's always Eggman's fault. But I also take the time to show Eggman as a competent threat to Sonic, to show that there is a reason to not trust him, to be wary of him, and I allow Eggman a chance to hit Sonic, and his rings go flying. Very typical thing. The rings being collected, being scattered. And so we get a bit of Eggman's laughter. For those who missed the last stream, I base Eggman's laughter from the Sonic Drift Japanese instruction manual. A lot of my inspiration for even getting to the point of deciding to do a redesign of Amy stems from the contents of that instruction manual. So a little surprised that I have Eggman laughing that way. And of course, him and Sonic banter and they bite back and forth. And again, this obsession of Sonic's that I continue to carry on, with him again putting the blame on Eggman. And Eggman's enjoying it to a degree. However, even he has reservations about this, because one of the things about Eggman is, well, he's always glad to take credit for what he's done, and besting Sonic fills him with pride. Being blamed for something he doesn't done, his ego won't let him accept it. He has to know he was in control. He has to know he was the one who won. Eggman is very, very egotistical, very self-absorbed, very vain, but he's also very prideful, and he's not going to take credit for something which isn't his. But I also take this time over the next couple of paragraphs here to show the playfulness of Eggman and to demonstrate how he interacts with the world. But also how competent he is, the ease with which he deals with these golems, even as Sonic is able to rebound and keep pressing. And of course, he's also still always more than happy to, show off his own stuff, as well as best Sonic. And as we continue forward through the boss fight and these in-boss fight discussions, I continue with the banter between Sonic and Eggman, partly so that way I can set up the shift for Sonic to finally confront the idea that Eggman's literally just as ignorant of what's going on as he is, if not more so. And hence why I start to demonstrate irritation from Eggman while he's still boasting and bragging about his own genius. And then we have the big moment, the big breaking point of the scene, and which kind of divides this particular scene into two parts: the boss battle and the fallout of this whole trip to the Death Egg. And I start to now paint everything as a massive mistake. And it's also at this point in the scene where I take the time to switch what I'm listening to again, as it is meant to be a hugely emotional blow to Sonic what happens here. And so that's where we roll forward, and the idea of Eggman asking that same question that all of this started with back in Chapter 3, when Tails asks the very question in the very same way, Amy. And this is supposed to be a huge blow to Sonic. Everything he's been doing here is based on the idea that they're in the past because of Eggman's own machinations. And if you want an example of the Death Egg being a huge part of a jump back in time, huge machinations of Eggman, where everybody forgets their memories, I actually can quote the Archie comics. And that was part of the whole Genesis arc, which ended up being the setup to the roboticization of Sally Acorn. And so it's not the first time, even across the multiverse that is the Sonic IP, that Sonic has encountered such a scheme for Eggman. There's actually precedence, aside from his own arrogance and blaming everything on Eggman, his own obsession with Eggman doing a scheme like this. However, in this case, it is not Eggman's fault. Now, the reader at this point, just due to the opening chapter of the AU and the introduction of my AU's primary antagonist, Emperor Benedict Yodoku, the God of Rings, we already know this isn't Eggman's fault, but when you're writing a character, you have to write them from in-universe. Despite how entertaining meta can be from a comedy standpoint, if anybody's familiar with the Deadpool franchise, that is an excellent example of meta done well. And as a result, you end up with this scenario where the story no longer takes itself seriously, though. And in moments where it does take itself seriously, the meta becomes the form of comic relief. And when the meta becomes a form of comic relief, that also implies too small of a cast, or that it is heavily focused on a single character. Sonic himself, despite being the titular character of the franchise, and the story effectively being about him, the stories have always been written and presented at their best more so about how Sonic affects the people he meets on his adventures. And so he's more of a second person story. And typically, whoever the individual standalone episode is about plays almost a Watson to Sonic Sherlock Holmes. The story's about Sonic and his fight with Eggman, but this person is the one observing it, talking about it, growing, and learning over the course of the adventure. And that's a very different way to do it, second person storytelling, especially when the narrator becomes more important than the title character, despite the fact that it's technically the fight of the title character which is affecting the narrator. And the example that I like to use a lot as a good example of a second person story is Shakugan no Shana. If you're not an anime fan or fan of Japanese media, you won't know it, but Shana is the title character, and the story is about her battles with the enemies that she fights and her growth as the type of warrior that she is. But throughout the majority of the series, until nearing the end, where the narrator and effectively main character has been shaped so much by her adventures and battles that he becomes the series antagonist. It's a pretty wild shift, but he is, for the most part, the narrator of her story, even as eventually he becomes the antagonist of it and loses his position as narrator. And there are other such examples of it as well. Sword Art Online people are probably a lot more familiar with if you're familiar with the character Liz, who lives as a blacksmith during the first book. She has a particular episode which focuses on her going on a small adventure with Kirito to gather materials to make a sword for him. The original short story that that's based off of is actually told from her perspective rather than Kirito's, which is typically the perspective of the story. And as such, it becomes a second person story. This is a story about Kirito getting a second sword, so that way he can more efficiently use the dual wielding style that he's picked up. But it's told through Liz's eyes, and she has her growth arc while joining him on this adventure to get these materials. And so second person storytelling is a huge thing in Japanese media, and Sonic himself fits it very, very well, that despite being the title character and the main character, it is usually best to approach it from a second person perspective. Now, that tangent, I have to admit, I completely forgot where it started. But getting back to the idea of Sonic's emotions, we go into this paragraph, and his heart skips a beat. He's suddenly hit with the reality that he's been having since near the beginning of this episode. And in the case of Tails, he doesn't let himself get angry because, Tails is his best friend. The fact that Tails has forgotten is more upsetting. But Eggman, it's not just upsetting, he's been wanting to blame Eggman for all of this. And suddenly he can't. And so he gets angry and he needlessly takes it out on Eggman. And if you need proof that Sonic has no problem lashing out, even beyond needs to, especially when he's angry, just consider why a lot of people like Dark Super Sonic from Sonic X. Because they see Sonic pushed beyond his breaking point, and he absolutely lashes out in the most terrifying of ways. And so, faced with this anger from Sonic, Eggman tries to be a little witty himself to try to maintain some control himself. There's a constant battle typically between Sonic and Eggman of who has control. And I think a lot of times, a lot of people aren't used to seeing Eggman with control. And when they do see him with control, they expect him to be sadistic rather than a showman and a clown still. And a lot of that goes to Sonic comic book writer Ian Flynn. And I will give Flynn credit where credit's due, but there's a general reason why I'm not always fond of his work, because he will twist the characters and take them away from the story that he's telling. In this case, I'm taking the traits of the characters, Sonic's obsession with Eggman, and I'm using that to tell my story, and so I can break this trait and get back to who Sonic should be. It's a little weird to a degree, and not necessarily how I originally planned for any of this to go, but it is how it did end up going. And I don't mind, because it was a nice way to explore an aspect of Sonic's character that I don't think really gets acknowledged. And so we take Sonic's anger now, and we really drive it home. And I really dive into this anger of Sonic's, but also show that despite how angry Sonic is, Eggman is not really scared of him. And part of the idea of him not being scared of Sonic and just simply lost as to what's going on is that's kind of subtle in the background, showing that Eggman is still that dangerous. But conversely, he's also just confused here. And as confused as he is, it's hard to be scared. And so, it's kind of tricky to play with, though, especially if one's familiar with Sonic Boom, where it's almost a frenemy setup, as the term would be. Enemies but friends. And it can be very easy to see that here, which is one of the reasons why I need to break Sonic. I need his anger over the top. I need his anger and why he's angry to confuse Eggman, to show that Sonic is so broken here that he's harmless. And it's kind of an interesting and difficult thing to do with a character like Sonic, who's typically very static. You won't see growth of his character. And so I really gotta find aspects of his character that I can grab onto to work with these ideas. And it's a bit tricky. But I will still play with the fact that Sonic is also a positive character, even with his own obsessions. And it's plenty to talk about Sonic being an obsessive character. Its obsession is usually used as a negative against Amy, and I will frequently talk about the fact that if you want to understand Amy, you need to understand Sonic, because she is effectively a Sonic clone. Where he's got recolors and shadow, silver to a degree, and Nephiles. Amy herself is a clone even in her personality. And so if Amy's capable of obsession, then unquestionably Sonic is also capable of obsession. And so it's kind of a fun aspect to see here, and something to really get a chance to play around with, and both find ways to explore it positively and negatively. Right now we're playing with it negatively, and showing that Sonic has kind of made a fool out of himself, as well as those he cares about. So, as Eggman tries to, distract Sonic from this anger, no less get mad at Sonic for damaging more of his machines, typical Eggman pride. I then, of course, give Amy's description, a pink hedgehog girl. And this is pretty much the breaking point for Sonic. Because Eggman truly doesn't know, and Sonic has to accept it now. There is absolutely no understanding on Eggman's part. And considering we're talking about a genius with an IQ of 300, he should be able to understand. And that he doesn't. That the cluelessness is there in his eyes. And so, really, at this point, Sonic is meant as a character to be broken. And if nobody believes that Sonic as a character can break, then I need simply remind you of Sonic 06, and you will see a point where Sonic breaks, which is before Silver helps him do some light time traveling to save Elise, when he fails to save her and the egg carrier crashes. He could not catch up. He put in all that effort, and it still was not enough to save her, and he breaks down there. So it is not a new thing for Sonic. He can break down. And if he can't lash out, as you see with the Dark Supersonic scenario, which really I could almost see somebody playing that up with this particular scene, as he still has all that chaos energy clinging to him from his last supersonic transformation. Which is very unusual, but I could see the scene playing out that way, and it would really play into Sonic's anger. It'd be kind of interesting to see how somebody would actually write this scene as a comic scene and how it would be brought across. And so I take a moment now to talk about Eggman's defenselessness here, but effectively I'm saying that Eggman's not in a position to attack Sonic, more so than I'm saying he's truly defenseless. But of course, I also want to play with Eggman's arrogance and his pride, and so seeing Sonic defeat it and it not being his fault. He can't take pride in that. He can't take pleasure in this victory because it's not his. And so he has to build Sonic up again so he can tear him down himself. And hence, we lead to Eggman attempting to cheer Sonic up. And this is actually the second time in this opening episode that one of these characters that someone has had to try to cheer Sonic up. And it's kind of funny if one thinks about it, but the big thing that's had Sonic all messed up this whole time is a loss of the future. But specifically, the moments that I use where I break Sonic, usually I have Amy mentioned, and it is important to remember this is a Song Amy AU. So even though I'm not really being direct with Sonic's feelings for Amy, I am still establishing the idea that Amy's this important to him. And even if he doesn't realize it, his heart does. And so it reaches out. It's hurting because something that should be there that it treasures is gone. And though I moved to have Eggman be the one to comfort him, of course this is Eggman. He's a troll. He's a monster. He's a showman. He's a braggart. He's an egotist, vainglorious. He's Dr. Eggman. And so, in this case, Eggman, of course, approaches from the scientific method. But he's also still Eggman, hence the grin. He's still enjoying seeing Sonic defeated, even if he's got to pick him up to break him down himself. And so from there, what I choose to move into is now introducing the idea of how wrong the world is. Obviously, the fact that what should have been the past is now a future which doesn't exist is gone is already a problem. And I've been hinting at it throughout the opening episodes, is that whatever game Yodoku is playing, which was introduced in the very beginning, it has affected the world tremendously. And so, Eggman concedes he didn't win. Something else beat Sonic. And that aggravates him. However, he still has to beat him himself. And this is where now I'm able to move into the idea of introducing the Ring of Memories, the Golden Gear Ring. Or as I'll start calling it later on, in a more colloquial sense, the Sky Ring. And now we get into this big dramatic scene, of course, where I introduce it into the scene. It's not its first appearance in the story. It first appears all the way back in the first episode, first chapter, when Yodoku was commenting on it. And so, of course, as I said, I take the time to introduce it. And, let Eggman be the showman, of course. He's showing it off. This is the focus. This is the next great plan. Come and stop me if you can, when you don't even know. And, I take the time, of course, to describe its size. And it's just one of those things that I'm always introducing. And I gotta make sure when talking about it that I refer to the darkness with a capital D. Let's say I was dealing with some languages without capital letters, I would always put darkness in parentheses. It's that important of a word. And of course, at the end of this paragraph, I again introduce this is Yodokus, but nobody knows who he is. He's a threat unknown. And so, of course, I take the time to distract Sonic. I can't linger on it forever. I gotta still make sure Eggman is presented as a threat. He's bested at this point, or was. He's already recovered. And I also used this point for Sonic and Eggman to have a really weird moment talking about this ring and its unusual relationship with the world. It's always been there, yet Eggman never studied it. He can't fathom why. Why would he not? But now Sonic's been acting weird and was totally oblivious of this ring. Eggman now has reason to believe this ring deserves his attention and it's no longer just a background thought. And with that, I end the last of the interactions of this part of the story. And one of the most important things that I've been building to this point, and this is what I was talking about earlier as I go into this last paragraph, and I was talking about it before as well, was the need to separate Sonic from Tails. As much as people love Tails, and as much as I can love the Fox, there is a relationship between Sonic and Tails which does not allow me to explore Sonic in certain ways, because Tails will fill those gaps and be kind of an inconvenient character. But plus, I need Sonic's mind unfocused. There are things he has to do, things he has to explore, things he has to figure out. And so, what we end up with here is the idea of Sonic going out. Also, I wanted to separate Tails from Sonic so I could have Sonic pilot into the tornado again. To me, it's extremely important to show the plane is Sonic's and to show that he is a skilled pilot. Now, though, I remove Tails in a very particular way. And that is this Clockwork Fox of crystal and broken cogwheels. Obviously, up to this point in the story, there has been nothing like it. And that's kind of the idea. Its introduction at this point is to give an idea of one of the things Sonic is going to be looking for, one of the things that's on his mind. And this entity, it will probably be forgotten about as I go through the next episode, which is fine, because as I introduce these entities and their roles in the story, they should typically come out of left field. They should be unexpected. It should be a question of what is it, why is it here, what's going on. And is it part of the Golem factor? Is it part of Yodaku's factor? Is it a new factor? What is it exactly? And I want to keep that confusion right now. And so this whole paragraph is pretty much the cooldown of the story arc of the episode of New History. It started with Sonic completely confused, and it ends with Sonic completely confused. He has gone back to where he started, but he's lost even more. It was not a good story for Sonic. And as I said, part of it is that I was trying to break Sonic, so that way, of all the things I can take away from him, it is to put myself in a position to take away from him this Eggman obsession. Now, whether or not it can be said to have succeeded is a different matter. We'll see how Sonic's character influences my story as I go on, but at this point of the story, his obsession is gone, and he's not sure what to do. And of course, as we move forward, I talk about Sonic always moving forward. It's just what he does, it's what he's always done. And I also use a passage of time at this point, because the tornado obviously needs repaired. Sonic's got to survive on the Death Egg with all these golems. And a last little hint that despite being in the sky, it can't be reached, which is bizarre. And I also take the time to now define Sonic at a very different point from what most people know. His friends are in limbo. He has no idea what's happened to them. But of course, he's working with limited time because Eggman's active. And I also now switch at this point to referring to the Ring of Memories as the Sky Ring. And so, with that, I wrap up Sonic's part of the story, and hence why I end the zone. Now, typically, as we get to the final part of a scene, I usually just write one paragraph to wrap up what happened above, and to tie it back to the opening paragraph. But in this case, I avoid doing that because the end of this scene is meant to finally introduce Rosie to the story. She isn't named here, but she's finally introduced to the story. I also start to set the idea of the whole world being used to it. And I also introduce a character nobody knows. Yes, I'm using the term Nana. She is not referring to a physical relative. I will introduce that character later on. More likely than not next weekend, so I'm going to have to make sure I take the time to draw her this week. Lots and lots of drawing to do this week. That means I got at least 3 characters to draw this week, and I don't have a lot of time. It's going to be an interesting challenge with my art skill and art level, so. And so you also now see really quickly here the type of life that she's living right now, and it's very far detached from what most people should know, because she even considers it to be an adventure. And then, of course, just because it is the big transition point, I now also introduce one more character here, and he is the last of what I'm going to call the main characters of the story, which will be Sonic, Rosie, and this OC. If you follow me on Twitter, you already know who he is, or at least you've seen him and know his name. Who he is will be one of the mysteries of the AU story, and I hope everybody will enjoy learning who he is, along with Sonic, Rosie, and he himself. But with that, the scene reaches its end, and it's time for me to run the editor. Well, I should, of course, freak out and overcheck everything and undo everything I already corrected. So, I'll just run through that real quick. If anybody has any final questions, feel free to go ahead and leave them over in the chat. I'll be glad to answer them. that, we wrap up the check, and that will mean that today's stream is over. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining me. As there don't appear to be any questions, I will go ahead and leave everyone with the date for the next stream, which will be next Sunday morning, the 10th of April, 9 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time, as always. And unlike when I left everyone for break, there's the Ringbond main theme by Shimshon the Gadite over on Twitter. Check him out. Great musician and composer. Worth a follow. Worth your time. And in other news, as we wrap up today's scene, before next week's streams, the first 2 chapters of the story will be available on Tapas, Twitter, Tumblr, and DeviantArt. So if you need links, feel free to let me know either now or next week, and I'll be glad to start sharing them. Obviously, if you're following the streams on a regular basis, you're about a month ahead of what everybody just reading the story will be. And so while everybody else will be starting the episode of New History, next week we will be starting the episode of Amnesia Island. Look forward to seeing everyone then, and until then, stay well.